So after that, I read, or maybe before that, I'm not entirely sure. I read The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson, and I really didn't. I really didn't care for it. This is like the third or fourth reread I've done of this, and it did not work for me this time. Uh, and I'll get into that in a moment. So William Hope Hodgson died during the First World War, and so this is an older book, and he had a penchant for writing his books in an old-fashioned way. This is probably the least old-fashioned of all his novels. I think he wrote three or four, maybe more than that. Uh, it's about a couple of men who go to Ireland. They go on a fishing trip, and they go out into the countryside of Ireland, and they wander down this creek, and they find the ruins of a house that is out on a precipice over a huge pit with uh, the stream running into this pit, and they can't actually see the bottom of it. And they are really astounded by this because it's very wild, very strange, and they are digging around in these ruins, and one of the men finds a trunk, and they break it open, and inside is a manuscript. It is a kind of a journal written by the man who had lived in this ruined house. And they go back to their camp, and the one man reads it out loud to the other. And it is by an old man who has moved into this castle, this old castle, with his sister and a dog, and we learn later on a cat, uh, because William Hope Hodgson had this strange way of holding things back and then just kind of throwing them into the story unexpectedly. So we don't learn about the cat for about 100 pages, which isn't really a big deal, I guess, but he would do that with other things, just kind of come up with something seemingly on a whim and stick it in the story. Uh, Now, the people have, he heard these stories when he moved into this house about how it's not a good place to live. There's something odd about this place, and you shouldn't live there. But he wants to get away from the whole world, and he moves into the house anyway, and he lives there for quite some time and really is fine living out in the middle of nowhere. His sister is basically a non-entity. She never speaks in this book. We never get an idea of what she is like or her thoughts, what she thinks about this old man, her brother, who has basically just carted her off into the wilderness like this. We don't know if she wanted to go with him or she didn't want to go with him. We have no idea. And one night, the man is in his library. I don't think we ever learn his name, but he's in his library, and he sort of dozes off, or he's not entirely sure at first, but he finds himself pulled out of his own body, out of his own house, into in another dimension, basically, and he sees like a valley, and there's an exact copy of his house in this valley, except it is huge. And this valley is surrounded on all sides by mountains, and on these mountains are huge gods. Like there are Hindu gods and other gods from all over the world, and they look like stone, but they are not stone. They are living, and he realizes that they are living, but they are godlike, right? And so they just maybe a thousand years is a single moment for them, and it's really odd. And he comes closer and closer and closer down to this huge copy of his own house, and when he gets there, a giant swinish man, a pig man, huge pig man, is walking around this house and is like the personification of evil, I guess. We never really learn what that is about. And when he gets back home into his own body, after this pig man has noticed him there, um, pigmen start to attack his home over several weeks. And he bars up this castle and shoots his rifles at them, and he pushes a big stone off the top of the castle roof onto one of them. And every time he kills one, he goes out and it's not there anymore. There's no blood, there's no tracks or anything like that. Uh, and so his sister, we don't ever find out what she's doing, really. Uh, but she's got to think it's pretty odd that her brother has just lost his mind and started shooting out the window at things, uh, and has locked her into her room. And we don't ever get anything she's saying except she seems to have gone mad. I can't imagine why. Um, because our brother never says, "Hey, watch out! There are pigmen. Something bad is happening here." He just keeps to himself, and he shoots at these pigmen out the window. And then when he's not shooting at the pigmen, he is sitting in his room reading. And then he'll just like wander outside and walk around, and no pigmen around today, And then they come back in the night, and he hears this tremendous noise, and he goes and he finds that there's like a pit where the water goes down into it anyway, but there has been an even bigger collapse, and he sees a cave down there, and he goes down on a rope. His dog jumps in after him. The water is rising, and they go into this cave, and they find a huge pit, like a huge abyss. And he walks all around it and puts candles all around it, and then the water level rises and almost sweeps him into this pit. The dog's name is Pepper. It almost sweeps him and Pepper into this pit, washes all his candles out, and so they struggle back to the mouth of this cave, and he has to struggle with his dog up out of this pit. And it gets even weirder from there. He goes back to his home, and this pit, by the way, is right directly underneath his home. And he thinks he hears some weird stuff in his cellar. He goes down to the cellar. He's lived here all this time. He's never really explored his cellar. It's huge. He finds a trap door that leads directly, it is directly over the pit. And he goes into his library, he's reading his book, and all of a sudden he is swept up in this colossal time shift where time starts moving extremely fast. The sun comes up and goes down, and it goes so fast that it leaves a blur across the sky. And then, like the house crumbles around him, the land changes, the plants all die off, all this crazy stuff happens. And I realize that I am like giving spoilers here, but you can't really spoil this book. I mean, this book really has to be experienced to be there's no spoiling. It's what I'm trying to say. This is a book that has to be experienced. And that's it just didn't work for me because all these things, they don't seem to have any. The giant pig man. What is the giant pig man? What are these pig beings? We don't ever really find out. Why are all these gods watching this house? We don't really know. Um, who built a trap door over this pit? What's the deal with that? We don't know. What's the pit for? We don't know. Why is he experiencing this time shift? We don't know. It is a very strange book, and I can see why people continue to talk about this book, because I think at first glance it seems to have a great deal of depth to it, but as I have read it and reread it over the years, the depth seems to be lacking, and it just seems to be made up of all these. Isn't that weird? That's strange, and that's fine. If you want to write a book that's just strange, I mean, that's perfectly fine. But it does lend to a interpretation of the book that says, well, this is just a bunch of jumbled up bits thrown together that don't really have anything, any explanation. That don't make sense. Yeah, I don't know. It just didn't work for me this time, and that's okay. I don't know if I'll ever read it again. I was glad to reread it. I know that I said I might do a read aloud of it, but I don't think that I will. Um, anyway, let's move on. This is the last book too. So this is John Krakauer's Classic Krakauer. This is a collection of articles that he wrote and that were published in magazines from the 80s into the early 2000s, I think. Or maybe, I think the latest article in this is from 2010, come to think of it. And I found this at a Goodwill in Harrodsburg, and I wasn't going to buy anything. I'd been to several other stores and didn't find anything that whole day. And I found this, and I flipped it open to a story. I don't remember. It's called Loving Them to Death. And it's not a story, it's an article. Uh, some people used to call articles stories. I don't know if they still do. But it was published in Outside magazine, October 1995, and it is a story of, well, it is an article about these wilderness camps where they sent troubled teens and how basically they were, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and the one that he's talking about in particular, were run by unqualified sadistic lunatics who treated their charges like dirt. Uh, and basically, what they would do at this camp was they would take a kid from their suburban high school. Maybe the kid in question, uh, the first the first kid in question, he was 16 or 17, and his parents caught him smoking weed. So they sent him to this wilderness camp where they would force him to uh, do these gigantic hikes, these huge, very long hikes. So they took this kid right out of the suburbs, never been hiking, never been in I think it was in Utah or Colorado, never been in this kind of terrain before, uh, very hot, and they put the kids on rations. And so instead of feeding these kids, they made them carry their own food. They made them carry their own water. If they ran out of food, if they ran out of water, they just went hungry. Um, and that is a recipe for disaster. You cannot take someone who is not trained, someone who is not used to hiking, put them in brand new boots. Anyone who's ever been hiking knows what happens when you go out hiking in brand new boots uh, in the heat. And this kid, I'm gonna look up his name because his name is worth knowing. His name was Aaron Bacon, and this camp was run by a lunatic. And to recount what went on it's just disturbing. It's incredibly sad. Um, he he was bullied from the moment he got there, not just by the guy who ran this place or the teachers who had no qualifications, or the guides rather, who had very little qualifications. I mean, they had no qualifications. This man drove up to them and said, "Hey guys, do you want a job?" And they said yes. And they did the bare minimum, basically treat the kids like dirt and uh, belittle them and tell them they're slackers. And they told this kid he was a slacker. They told him that he was a bad apple, that he was just lying and making things up and doing all this stuff. He was a malingerer. And actually, he was dehydrated. He was, he, they treated him like garbage. He lost control of his bladder and his bowels because I guess the other kids say that he went from being a normal looking kid, a normal acting kid, to looking like a skeleton, a walking skeleton. This is over a week and a half, and he developed I think like a perforated uh, something happened in his abdomen, and he got sepsis. He was in god awful pain. He told them this. They said he was a malingerer. The guy who ran the place came down, called him all kinds of names. They stood around and called him all kinds of names while he was dying. He died in the truck, basically while they were standing around making fun of him. And Krakauer goes on to recount how this has happened in other places, how one girl went to a different place, a different wilderness camp. I'm not, and they told her that she was a malingerer, that she was there just to get self-confidence back. She went there voluntarily. Her parents didn't force her to go. She thought it would be good for herself. And she went out with an untrained guide who once again belittled her, told her she was making things up, uh, when actually she was extremely dehydrated. She collapsed multiple times. The guide forced her to go on this walk again and again and again. She went blind, and then she died. Uh, that was really that was a very, very sad story. It's a true story, and it goes on to explain how these people who ran these camps, um, how they got off these charges. They got out of it. They should have went to prison, um, and they didn't. It was a massive miscarriage of justice. Uh, and Krakauer is a very good writer. He wrote Into Thin Air. He wrote Into the Wild. I've read both of those. He wrote some other books I'd really like to read. That is John Krakauer, by the way. Uh, so he was uh, Into Thin Air is a book about a disastrous day on Mount Everest. He was there. He was climbing Mount Everest, and a storm blew in and killed many people on the mountain that day, and almost killed him. I know there was a movie about it, but it's a true story. Uh, and there are other stories in this book. One talks about how the Sherpas on Mount Everest are living their lives in constant danger, having to climb up and down this mountain with all this gear, carrying all this weight over crevasses and that sort of thing, living under the threat of landslides, of uh, what is it? There's some kind of thing that affects people at a certain altitude where they might just drop dead, uh, and how they are underpaid. There's a disaster where I think quite a few Sherpas died, and they went on strike. The rest of the Sherpas had gone on strike because the the I think the government wasn't going to pay them very much, the families very much money or anything like that. So they went on strike for more money and for more benefits, more like health insurance, life insurance, that sort of thing. And they were not paid very much at all to do this sort of work. He also talks about how Everest has become this huge tourist destination, and so it's not uncommon to have 60 or 70 people standing, toe to heel, trying to go up Everest to the peak. How there's all this garbage on Everest. There is a story about a surfer who was kind of an egotistical narcissist who uh, could also be very humble and a very pleasant person to be around, but he went and rode this huge wave and wound up dying uh, somewhere. It's very interesting. There's an article about an architect who would go to his building sites and sit on the site for a while and build his buildings so that they fit in with the uh, landscape and that sort of thing, and how he had really alienated himself from all these other architects because he said, my way is the only way, this is the best way, and this is the only way to do it. And he would also go to these, he would also take on these jobs and then not be able to do them in time, and that would make the people who hired him very angry. And there's also Gates of the Arctic, which is about a trip he took in the Brooks Range in Alaska. I think it's the Brooks Range, and how even in this wild place, it's not like a normal national park. It's very hard to get to it, but there are still lots and lots of people going there, and they are driving their ATVs and stuff like that through the wilderness and causing a lot of problems. There's one about a former football player who went on a guided mountain climbing, uh, he was being taught how to do intermediate mountain climbing, and he somehow, it's speculated that he tied his harness wrong and wound up falling, and the consequences of that for the company and for the manufacturer of the harnesses, which, if I remember right, it was the original bit of Patagonia, like the Patagonia company. So it started out in the guy's garage where he was making climbing implements, and that is the company that was shut down because of the huge insurance premiums and the uh, just the way that they could be sued now when even it was user error. There's an article about Mount Rainier and how it is an actual active volcano, and it just the amount of power that this volcano has. Seattle is very close to it, and it could just decimate Seattle basically at any moment. And it documents, or he talks about these eruptions that have happened over the past several thousand years, where uh, giant plumes of ash and rock and dirt will flood 100 miles and wipe out everything in the way. And you wouldn't think that that is possible, but it completely is. He talks about Mount St. Helens. This is just a really good book, really, really good collection of articles. I really did enjoy this.